Greetings, Eat Fat, Grow Slim watchers. I'm a faster. That's how I lose weight these days. It never used to be that way. It all used to be calorie-controlled diets, which were completely useless in the end. They sort of work. I want to talk about those a little bit because most people think you need a calorie deficit to lose weight. And although that's sort of true, it's not a good thing to pursue. Now, before I get into the bones of it, I want to explain why I eventually stopped believing in calorie-controlled diets, and I've probably earned the right to have this opinion. I've probably been on 40 diets in my life, all sort of calorie-controlled. My first diet was over 50 years ago, and then that time I've lost lots of weight. In fact, they all worked for a while, and over the 50 years I lost the equivalent weight of a donkey. However, by the end of that period, I was massively fat. Well, I was certainly a lot fatter than when I started. So they all worked for a while. The problem wasn't sort of losing the weight, it was sustaining that weight loss, and the big problem, of course, was keeping it off. So let's look at how a typical calorie control diet works. So the basic idea is simple. Your body needs a certain amount of calories, so a certain amount of energy essentially, each day that is measured in calories. And if your body normally burns around 2,500 calories, you simply eat fewer than that. Say perhaps 1,500 calories, maybe 1,000. And the difference between the two is known as the calorie deficit. That deficit should come off your body fat, and that's true to a point. At first it works. You carefully measure your food, you count calories, you spread your meals throughout the day so you don't get too hungry. The scales begin to move over days, and that's encouraging. However, what's really happening is at first you've got less food in your system. That means you're going to be a little bit less heavy. You will also start to shed a bit of water, and those two things help you lose weight, but not fat necessarily. So your real fat burning only starts maybe 3 or 4 days into the process, because a pound of body fat is 3,500 calories, and if your deficit is only 1,000 calories, then it's going to take 3.5 days minimum to actually lose weight as fat. Now, as time progresses, something changes. The weight loss shows, but it slows down, and then it slows down again, and eventually many people reach a point where they stop losing the weight altogether. Why? So the usual answer is that you've run out of willpower or something like that, or you're just fed up. I don't think that's the real answer. There are two things that are actually happening at the same time. First, as you lose weight, your body naturally needs fewer calories because there's simply less of you to carry around, so less of you to maintain, and your original calorie deficit is effectively smaller. But there's something else that's happening as well, and for weeks or even months your body has been receiving less energy than it wants, and it signals something inside the body. It begins adapting. Your metabolism slows as your body tries to conserve its remaining energy stores. Now you're burning fewer calories because each day you're not getting satisfied, and so a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, all that time you have this deep hunger inside you, and that's where most diets reach a crisis point. So what do you do now? Do you cut your calories even further, or do you give up? So that's the first response is, you go from a calorie deficit of 1,000 and you try a calorie deficit of 2,500. Now you're only eating maybe 1,000 calories. Maybe you can go down to 500 calories. But there's another problem, and I think it's actually the bigger one. You've been living with low-grade hunger every single day. Every meal is deliberately too small. You're never completely satisfied. You're always waiting for the next meal, planning the next meal, thinking about the next meal, counting calories, resisting temptation, food gradually becomes an obsession. Eventually, you fail. Because you're weak? No, it's because you're exhausted and your body is telling you to stop this foolishness. Now, it's different with fasting. Compare that with fasting for a moment. With fasting, you aren't trying to stay slightly hungry all day long. Instead, you have periods when you don't eat at all, followed by a proper, substantial meal that leaves you completely satisfied. But maybe this is only once a day. Maybe it's once every 2 days. That moment of satiation changes everything. Instead of 6 disappointing meals all day long, you get one meal that actually tells your brain, I've had enough. Rather than, I've had enough. For me, that made fasting dramatically easier to live with than the traditional calorie restriction. Here's my little history of calorie restriction. Okay, this is a sort of potted history of my dieting. You can see over here, when I was about 14, I was quite a heavy lad, but when I was about 14, I went on my first calorie-controlled diet, and I was very pleased to get down to here. However, by the time I was 20, I was heavier than I was when I started. What you can't see through here is the yo-yoing. So I went up, then down, up, then down, up, then down, but the whole trend over the whole period was to go from 200 pounds to 260 pounds. Look, this is a bit of an anomaly. That's cancer. I'm not recommending cancer as a dietary method. However, I thought I was doing very well to get down to here. Unfortunately, it all went back on until I got to here, which I reached a crisis point where I was very sick and I discovered fasting. Now I'm here and I've been down here for 4 years. So, why does calories in, calories out method fail? So I think we have to understand what a calorie is. Calories only measure energy, and that's perfectly reasonable, but energy isn't the most important thing in the body. It's certainly very important, but it's not the whole story. Imagine I put 3 foods in front of you. There's 100 calories of sugar, there's 100 calories of olives, and there's 100 calories of cabbage. They all contain the same number of calories. They all have the same energy. But does anyone seriously believe they'll have exactly the same effect inside your body? Of course they won't. They're completely different in volume. Fibre, fat, protein, digestibility, hormones, the hormone response that is, and perhaps most importantly, how hungry will you feel after you've eaten it? 100 calories of sugar. Spike your insulin, you may get satiated immediately, but 2 minutes later you will be very hungry again. A calorie is a calorie, they say, but you can understand why people are now saying a calorie is not a calorie. I understand what they mean from a physics point of view, but biology is far more complicated than physics. A calorie measures energy only. It doesn't tell you what that food will actually do inside your body. So the sugar causes your blood to rise rapidly, your body responds with insulin. Insulin helps you move that glucose into cells, but encourages energy to be stored and makes it harder to access stored body fat, because body fat is stored in the presence of insulin. Fat, while insulin remains elevated, will stay locked away. If your goal then is to burn body fat, that's an important distinction. And because sugar is digested so quickly, many people find they are hungry again, not long afterwards. So it's not just how much you eat, it's what you eat, and it's also when you eat. Those 3 questions, how much, what and when, matter far more than simply counting calories. But this is what reality looks like when you're on a calorie-controlled diet. You reach a point in the day when you've got nothing on your plate and the numbers are just adding up to a point where you can't add any more. Now, it took me 50 years and 40 diets and a graph that looked like a crooked staircase to realise that every steep drop on that graph represents months of discipline. Every climb back up represents the weight returning. For decades I thought I was failing, that it was something to do with me. I was too weak, I was too greedy, gluttonous. Eventually I realised it wasn't me, it was just the method that was wrong. Everything changed when I discovered low-carb eating and fasting. Within months, I'd lost 50 pounds, reversed my pre-diabetes, came off 5 medications, reduced another, and for the first time in my adult life, I found a way of eating that didn't leave me hungry. And weirdly, that didn't leave me hungry all day because I wasn't eating at all for most of the day. I know it's crazy, bear with me, but that's what I'm telling you. Because if you spent years blaming yourself, perhaps the problem isn't your willpower. Perhaps it's simply that you've been using the wrong tool. So, buckle up, have a look at my page, have a look at my videos, do comment, do subscribe if you like it, and let's get into a discussion. I can tell you more.